Trust is an essential component to any business environment. Staff that trust their managers and trust the business they work for are able to work more productively, not having to watch their backs all the time, and able to provide information to their managers and senior staff without worrying about retribution. Similarly, managers that trust their staff don't have to waste time on supervision and constant micromanaging to make sure that basic things get done. Similarly, clients that trust your organization don't worry so much and don't try to micromanage what you're doing for them. And therefore your energy and time can be spent on the actual work as opposed to constant client interaction. But trust is a very rare commodity in these environments, in large part because it is very poorly understood. All too often, industries see trust as a matter of pure communication, both with external clients and internally with staff. Far too often, managers will say to their staff that they can trust them, that you can come and talk to me anytime you've got a problem. My door is always open. But far too often, staff see these exact same statements of trust as being extremely untrustworthy. There is, after all, nothing less trustworthy than a person that says, "Trust me." The power imbalances at play, as well as past conduct in those environments, are much, much more important, and so often they are unmanaged for. For example, let's say a manager has an excellent relationship with their team, consistently gone into bat for that person, and has reliably stood up for their team members, protecting them from the various politics of higher management. This is an excellent environment, and in such an environment, perhaps the staff are willing to take their manager at their word that my door is always open, you can come and tell me when something's wrong. Perhaps they'll be willing to go in there and tell them that you've made a mistake, or that we've made a mistake, and that's going to have consequences for how well the team performs. This is ideal, because while that's not good news, you need to know it. Otherwise you can't manage the problem and prevent it from occurring again. But even with this extremely good relationship, all it takes is one time where that manager comes in, stubs their toe really, really hard on the edge of their desk, and subsequently is in a foul mood. Very, very understandable, of course. But imagine what happens then when the staff member comes in on that day with remarkably bad timing, comes in and tells them, "I don't think you've done a good job on this project." Normally, the manager might take a deep breath, process that information, and respond in a respectful and constructive manner. But today, this manager's in a really bad mood. They've stubbed their toe, they're in a lot of pain, and now here comes this staff member with this really bad news and personal criticism about them. And they snap. Just once, and not even that bad. They just tell the staff member, "Get out. I'm not dealing with you now." And there goes the relationship. Now, from the manager's point of view, that is hardly fair. An entire career's worth of trust built between the staff and them, consistent pattern of sticking up for them, good communication right up to this one incident. How is it fair that you'd throw away an entire relationship and you'd stop trusting this manager because of one simple snap? But from the staff's perspective, it's a very different story. What's just been illustrated to them is not that the manager is a monster, but rather that there's nothing stopping them from being a monster. That if this pattern of behavior continues, if they chose to be cruel or vindictive or throw their weight around, then they can. And what the staff have just realized is there's very little they can do to stop them. This illustrates the need for accountability to be built not just in relationships, but also in systems. Because the only way a staff can truly have confidence in their manager is if such retribution or vindictive behavior is not just unlikely, but flat out impossible. An excellent example of this in practice comes from 2019 with George Kalambaris, owner of a variety of different restaurants and celebrity chef from MasterChef, as you may remember. George was subsequently charged with having mispaid his workers to a substantial degree over a long period of time in 2019. He was fined by the government for doing so and subsequently went bankrupt paying those fines. He no longer owns those businesses and ownership has passed elsewhere. Now, while this punishment was substantial and the correction very justified, Consider the actual consequences to George versus, say, one of his employees who took $1,000 out of the cash register one night. While the consequences levied against George were significant, at the end of the day, he is still a free individual. He hasn't been charged criminally or been sent to prison. While the fine was immense, he still does have a lot of personal wealth. And while he lost control of his businesses, he can still find other work thanks to his celebrity status. Contrast this against one of his employees who worked in one of these restaurants on one night, hypothetically, took $1,000 out of the cash register. A substantially smaller crime with substantially less consequence for other people, a crime nonetheless. That employee is going to be ruined. $1,000 out of a cash register, they could be facing criminal prosecution. They will lose their job without question and could also, should George wish it, be blackballed from the entire restaurant industry. Significantly more accountability for a substantially smaller crime. Now, this won't necessarily happen, but it can. While he did end up being on the receiving end of a very significant fine and a lot of consequences, nonetheless finds himself quite well off at the end of all of this. What this illustrates is very similar to what happens in a business environment. That a concentration of power, the more significance to a decision of an individual in a business, the less accountability there tends to flow for this. And this is never more evident than when a business puts together a code of values or a code of ethics, saying that this is how you shall conduct yourself inside the organization. Every single employee in that organization understands, whether it's intended or not, that that code applies more stringently to junior employees than it does to senior. This is not to say that it will never be applied to those senior staff, but for example, if a senior staff member or executive makes a racist joke compared to a junior staff member, the options to bring this behavior into check are vastly wider for a junior staff member than for a senior staff member. And lacking any sort of oversight from an independent organization or a regulator, we get behavior such as we saw in the Banking Royal Commission of 2019, where immensely unethical practices become not just accepted, but the norm and rewarded. If we want to ensure that our customers and our employees can trust us, then the proof is in the pudding. It is not enough simply to ask people to trust you. It must be proven.